To this now, President Cyril Ramaphosa attended an extraordinary SADC summit where regional leaders strongly condemned the escalating violence in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. The heads of state reaffirmed their commitment to restoring peace and stability in the region. For more insights into this, we're joined now by Richard Mahomva, Director of International Communications in Zimbabwe. Richard, good to have you, and thank you very much for your time this afternoon. How significant are the resolutions reached by this summit and the communication, particularly around recognition of the work that has already been done as far as the Luanda process?
So let's start off with the timing that we had a sudden turn of political events as of this past month, and there was an immediate conversation by heads of state. So for me, it expresses the sense of organizational efficiency of the SADC grouping. Now, coming to the gathering, the fact that there were about 11 countries represented, it's quite, it effectively indicates the extent to which there is massive regional concern on what is happening in the DRC, and the fact that there's a collective decision about ending violence in the DRC, it also speaks volumes of the unity of purpose, the collective voice of the region, as it were.
Some, of course, parties to this, by some parts I'm talking about the Rwandan president, not recognizing that Southern African Development Community mission, saying it is a force that is there really to assist the DRC to fight against its own people.
No, the SADC is a regional body, and it is a regional body that responds to issues of pursuing territorial integrity, pursuing the sovereign dignity of all member states, of which the DRC is a member state. So what SADC is merely doing there is within the purview of its regional integration mandate, which compels any rational thinking person to actually support the move that SADC is making.
A peaceful solution, others are suggesting, and including South Africa at some point, saying, well, this particular conflict is not going to be resolved with arms, but rather with sitting around the table. And there are those who've been calling for SADC to put more pressure on the DRC to sit around the table with the M23 and come up with a political solution to this.
So we cannot ignore the fact that the so-called M23 represents the interests of a particular demographic group, and it is up to DRC to actually take the agency, take the paternal role that any normal state should take, and attend to the immediate needs of that particular grouping. Yes, we are also aware of the fact that there are allegations of external factors, but the state at this point should take the responsibility to say, these are our citizens, and on that basis, we are going to pursue that paternal role that we ought to have as the state. And I would like to also take you back to 2018. You'd remember that in his presidential campaigns, President Tshisekedi was consistent on the issue of pursuing unity. So on that basis, we want to see the implementation of that promise around unity, around social cohesion, which he presented as part of what brought him into power.
Of course, sit down with the East African community. Will that include a conversation around what Rwanda is calling for example, to have a peacekeeping force from the East African community, which would characterize, according to them, a legitimate peacekeeping operation in the region?
Well, for me, the collaborative effort of SADC and the East African community would speak about a genuine and a much-needed inclusive pan-African approach to the aspect of conflict resolution. Because for me, I don't see the East African community, I don't see the Southern African Development Community in terms of their institutional contributions to the peace building. But I see the collective quest for Africa to have peace, the collective quest for Africa to eradicate the legacies of colonialism, because the conflict that we are seeing in Eastern DRC, the conflicts that we are seeing there is quite depictive of the extent to which remnants of xenophobia are there, remnants of the colonial legacy are there. So when you have got joint regional groupings speaking with one voice, it's actually depicting the extent to which Africa is seeing the need for peace from a collective entry point. And I think that is a welcome development.
The presence of the Southern African or SADC mission there is seemingly weakened by lack of support from member states in terms of supporting the work of those troops that are there. Has there been a commitment to certainly beef up? I know the part of South Africa, for example, there are those who say the South African National Defence Force is not well resourced.
Well, you would recall that last year in November, there was an extraordinary summit that was called by the chair. And there were responses from member states. And the fact that you had 11 member states coming on board, for me, it's a diplomatic posture of the extent to which there is collective support. Yes, there may be challenges in terms of the logistical balance of things. But the fact that there is this act of solidarity amongst member states is quite illustrative of that particular support that all forces have. And of course, we understand that the current position of South Africa, given the deaths that we have witnessed, there is, of course, that emotive sentiment to say, you know, we are not supported and all of that. But I think it's just an emotional phase that we have to deal with collectively and appreciate that we all need this peace, and that it's not only South Africa that may be affected by the consequences of the lack of peace in the eastern region, but all other players that may be there.
Yeah. I mean, that logistical assistance is seemingly a big thing. We are hearing reports that part of the conversation, for example, that would have taken place between President Cyril Ramaphosa and President Kagame was around the supply of electricity, food, and water to the troops, which, of course, Rwanda would have said they would help facilitate.
Yeah, so if there's that logistical nightmare which should produce an outcome of peace, it means that beyond the resolutions that may appear to be overly diplomatic, we also need to go to the overall political economy of sustaining peace, because the sustenance of peace must be financed. And I think there should be a decisive, clear and specific direction and commitment from all member states. And I think that would be a prudent thing for all going forward. But the fact that I think the heads of state engaged yesterday, of course, those issues, I'm sure they might have arisen, and definitely a strategic direction will be taken to that effect.
Richard Mahomva, I appreciate your time this afternoon, Director of International Communications in Zimbabwe.